Well, today I'm going to start my video with a question. That is there going to be one super intelligent power or many? I know this is a different question from the one about kinetics, which I discussed in my earlier video, but anyway, it's related. And the next questions follow. Could an explosion in intelligence put one project so far ahead of the rest that it could control the future? Or will progress be more consistent, spreading out over a large front with many projects taking part, but none securing a decisive and long lasting lead? The speed of the transition from human to strongly superhuman intelligence was already examined in my previous video, that is in video 4. The parameter is crucial in determining the size of the gap that could realistically open up between a leading power and its closest rivals. And this implies a first-cut evolution. It is unlikely that two independent projects will take off simultaneously if the takeoff is quick, that is, completed in a matter of hours, days, or weeks, or a couple of months. Almost certainly, the first project would have finished its takeoff before any project would have begun its own. There may legitimately be several projects taken off at once if the takeoff is slow, so even though they will all have greatly improved capabilities by the time the transition is complete, there won't ever be a point when one project is significantly ahead of the others to give it a decisive advantage. And thereby a moderate takeoff is poised between the two, with either scenario being possible. Either more than one project is undergoing the takeoff simultaneously, or there is no takeoff anytime at all. Will one AI project outperform the rest by a margin significant enough to give it a strategic edge, for example, a level of technological and other advantages that would allow it to fully dominate the world? Would a project use a definite strategic advantage to squelch rivals and establish a singleton? When I say singleton, I mean a world order in which there is only one decision-making body on a global scale. And that singleton, if it were to come into possession of one, and if there is a winning project, how large would it be? Not in terms of physical size or budget, I mean, but in terms of how many people's desires will be in charge of its design. And each of these queries will be answered in this video. The rate of diffusion of whatever it is that gives the leader a competitive advantage is one factor that affects the size of the gap between frontrunner and followers. If followers can quickly adopt the frontrunner's innovations and ideas, it may be challenging for the frontrunner to establish and maintain a significant lead. A headwind caused by imitation favors laggards and disadvantages leaders, especially when intellectual property is not adequately protected. A leader may also be particularly susceptible to expropriation, taxation, or dissolution due to anti-monopoly legislation. It would be a mistake, however, to assume that this headwind must increase monotonically with the gap between frontrunner and followers. Just as a racing cyclist who falls too far beyond the competition is no longer shielded from the wind by the cyclist ahead, so a technology followers who lag sufficiently behind the cutting edge might find it hard to assimilate the advances being made at the frontier. And the gap in understanding and capability might have grown too large. The leader might have migrated to a more advanced technology platform, making subsequent innovations untransferable to the primitive platforms used by laggards. A sufficiently preeminent leader might have the ability to stem information leakage from its research programs and its sensitive installations, or just to sabotage its competitors' efforts to develop their own advanced capabilities. If the frontrunner is an AI system, it could have attributes that make it easier for it to expand its capabilities while reducing the rate of diffusion. For example, in human-run organizations, economies of scale are counteracted by bureaucratic inefficiencies and agency problems, including difficulties in keeping trade secrets, of course. And these problems would presumably limit the growth of a machine intelligence project so long as it is operated by humans. An AI system, however, might avoid some of these scarce economies since the AI's models need not have individual preferences that diverge from those of the system as a whole. Thus, the AI system could avoid a sizable chunk of the inefficiencies arising from agency problems in human enterprises. The same advantage, having perfectly loyal parts, would also make it easier for an AI system to pursue long-range clandestine goals. An AI would have no disgruntled employees ready to be poached by competitors or bribed into becoming informants. Well, it is possible that increased surveillance and globalization will shorten the usual delays between competing technological projects, but the average lag's potential shortening is likely to have a lower bound. Some projects, of course, will inevitably have better research, staff, leadership, budget, and infrastructure, or will simply stumble upon better ideas, even in the absence of dynamics that cause snowball effects. Even if the rival project is able to closely monitor what the forerunner is doing, it might take the rival project many months to switch to the superior approach if two projects pursue different approaches and one of them ends up working better. And combining these observations with our earlier discussion of the speed of the takeoff, I can conclude that it is highly unlikely that two projects will be close enough to undergo a fast takeoff concurrently. For a medium takeoff, it could easily go either way, and for a slow takeoff, it is highly likely that several projects will undergo the process in parallel. But the analysis needs a further step, that is, and here is the key question is not how many projects undergo a takeoff in tandem, but how many projects emerge on the yonder side sufficiently tightly clustered in capability that none of them has a decisive strategic advantage. If the takeoff process is relatively slow to begin and then gets faster, the distance between competing projects will tend to grow. To return to our bicycle metaphor here, the situation would be analogous to a pair of cyclists making their way up to steep hill, one trailing some distance behind the other, the gap between them then expanding as the front runner reaches the peak and starts accelerating down the other side. Now consider the following medium takeoff scenario. Suppose it takes a project 1 year to increase its AI capability from the human baseline to a strong superintelligence. And that project enters this takeoff phase with a 6-month lead over the next almost advanced project. The two projects will be undergoing a takeoff concurrently. It might seem then that neither project gets a decisive strategic advantage, but that need not be so. Suppose it takes, say, 9 months to advance from the human baseline to the crossover point, and another 3 to 5 months from there to a strong superintelligence. In this case, the front runner then attains strong superintelligence 3 months before the following, or 5 months before the following project even reached the crossover point. This would give the leading project a decisive strategic advantage and the opportunity to parlay its lead into permanent control by disabling the competing projects and establishing a singleton. And please note that the concept of a singleton is an abstract one. A singleton could be democracy or a tyranny, a single dominant AI, or a strong set of global norms that include effective provisions for their own enforcement, or even an alien overlord. Who knows? Its defining characteristic being simply that it is some form of agency that can solve all major global coordination problems. It may, but need not. resemble any familiar form of human governance. And a scenario of this kind is a real possibility because even if the takeoff is slow, there is a very good chance of explosive growth right after the crossover point. But when the powerful positive feedback loop of optimization power begins to operate, and this increases the likelihood that the leading project will gain a significant strategic advantage. What will the size of the successful project be? The question on the spot. Some intelligence-related paths likely belong to large, well-funded projects because they require a lot of resources. For example, wall brain emulation necessitates a variety of skills and expensive equipment. A large scale will also be a factor in biological intelligence enhancements and brain-computer interfaces. While a small biotech company might develop one or two drugs, achieving superintelligence via one of these avenues would likely require numerous inventions and tests and necessitating the support of an industry sector or a well-funded national program. Even more extensive input is needed, involving a significant portion of the global economy to achieve collective superintelligence by improving organizations and networks. Generally, the AI path is more difficult to assess. Perhaps it will require a very large research program. Perhaps it could be done by a small group. A lone hacker scenario cannot be excluded either. Building a seed AI might require insights and algorithm developed over many decades by the scientific community around the world, but it is possible that the less critical breakthrough idea might come from a single person or a small group that succeeds in putting everything together. And this scenario is less realistic for some AI architectures than others. A system that has a large number of parts that need to be tweaked and tuned to work effectively together and painstakingly loaded with custom-made cognitive content is likely to require a larger project. But if a seed AI could be instantiated as a simple system, one whose construction depends only on getting a few basic principles right, then the feat might be within the reach of a small team or even an individual. The likelihood of the final breakthrough being made by a small project increases if most previous progress in the field has been published in the open literature or made available as open source software. The size of the project that directly engineers the system must be distinguished from the size of the group that decides whether, how, and when the system is created. A team of scientists and engineers were primarily responsible for developing the atomic bomb. At its height, of course, the biggest one was Manhattan Project. Manhattan Project employed about 130,000 people, the vast majority of whom were engaged in building or construction work. However, the US military, which was under control of the US government, was ultimately answerable to the American electorate, which at the time made up about 1/10 of the adult population of the world. Governments would probably try to nationalize any project on their soil that they believe it was on the verge of taking off, given the extreme security implications of superintelligence. Strong state may also use any available means, including espionage, theft, kidnapping, bribery, threats, and military conquest to try and take over projects that are located in other nations. If a strong state is unable to acquire a foreign project, it may choose to destroy it instead, particularly if the host nation lacks an effective deterrent. It is possible that promising projects will be put under international control if global governance structures are strong by the time a breakthrough starts to look imminent. An important question, therefore, is whether national or international authorities will see an intelligence explosion coming. At present, intelligence agencies do not appear to looking very hard for promising AI projects or other forms of potential explosive intelligence amplification. If they are indeed not paying too much attention, this is presumably due to the widely shared perception that there is no prospect whatever of imminent superintelligence. If and when it becomes a common belief among prestigious scientists that there is a substantial chance that superintelligence is just around the corner, the majority intelligence agencies of the world would probably start to monitor groups and dig into it and individuals who seem to be engaged in relevant research. Any project that began to show sufficient progress could then be promptly nationalized. If political elites were persuaded by the seriousness of the case especially of the risk, civilian efforts in sensitive areas might be regulated or even outlawed. And the question is, how challenging will this monitoring be? If the only objective is just to monitor all the project, the task is simpler then. In that case, monitoring just a few of the projects with the most resources might be sufficient. Since many small projects and individuals are capable of making at least some progress, surveillance would need to be more extensive if the goal was to stop any work from happening. It will be much more easier to monitor projects that require significant amounts of physical capital, as will be the case with a whole brain emulation project. But artificial intelligence research, by contrast, requires only a personal computer and will therefore be more difficult to monitor. Some of the theoretical work could be done with pen and paper, yes, but even so, it would not be too difficult to identify most capable individuals with a serious long-standing interest in AI in general, in artificial general intelligence research, and such individuals usually leave visible trails. Like they may have published academic papers, presented at conferences, post on the internet forums or in social medias, or earned degrees from leading computer science departments. They may also have had communications with other AI researchers, allowing them to be identified by mapping the social graph. Projects designed from the outside to be secret could be more difficult to detect. An ordinary software development project could serve as a front. Only careful analysis of the code being produced would reveal the true intention and nature of what the project was trying to accomplish. And such analysis would require a lot of manpower, once only a small number of suspect projects could be scrutinized at this level. And the task would become much easier if effective lie detection technology had been developed and could be routinely used in this kind of surveillance. So much technology should be developed in the near future in order to realize what I'm saying. And the inherent difficulty of forecasting some types of breakthrough is another factor that could contribute to states failing to notice precursor developments. And this is more pertinent to AI research than to the advancement of whole brain emulation, because the latter is more likely to experience a clear gradient of steady advancement prior to the major breakthrough. And it is also possible that intelligence agencies and other government bureaucracies have a certain clumsiness or rigidity that might prevent them from understanding the significance of some developments that might be clear to some outside groups. Barriers to official understanding of a potential intelligent explosion might be especially steep. It is conceivable, for instance, that the topic will become inflamed with religious or political controversies, rendering it taboo for officials in some countries. The topic might become associated with some discredited figure or with charlatanry and hype in general, hence shunned by respected scientists and other establishment figures. Industry groups might lobby to prevent aspersions being cast on profitable business areas, and academic communities might close ranks to marginalize those who voice concerns about long-term consequences of the science that is being done. And consequently, it is impossible to rule out a complete intelligence failure. Such a failure is especially likely if developments take place sooner rather than later, before the problem has gained widespread attention. Political leaders might not pay attention or to follow to advise, even if intelligence agencies get it right. It took an extraordinary amount of work from several forward-thinking physicists to launch the Manhattan Project, especially Mark Oliphant and Leo Szilard. Mark convinced Eugene Wigner to convince Albert Einstein to sign a letter urging President Franklin Roosevelt to look into the matter. Roosevelt and his successor Harry Truman both expressed skepticism about that Manhattan project's viability and importance, even if it had reached its full scale. For better or worse, it would probably be harder for a small group of activists to affect the outcome of an intelligent explosion if big players, such as governments, are taking active part. Opportunities for private individuals to reduce the overall amount of existential risk from a potential intelligent explosion are therefore greatest in scenarios in which big players, as I said, like governments, remain relatively oblivious to the issue, or in which the early efforts of activists make a major difference to whether, when, which, or with what attitude big players enter the game. Activists seeking maximum expected impact may therefore wish to focus most of their planning on such high leverage scenarios in which big players end up calling all the shots are more probable. The likelihood of international cooperation increases as global governance structures become more robust. If the importance of an intelligence explosion is widely understood beforehand, and if effective monitoring of all significant projects is possible, coordination may also be more likely. International cooperation would nevertheless be possible even if monitoring proved to be impossible. And to support a collaborative project, numerous nations may band together. If such joint project had adequate funding, it might stand a good chance of being the first to accomplish the task, especially if any competing projects had to be modest and covert in order to avoid being discovered. Well, there are precedents of large-scale successful multinational scientific collaborations, such as the International Space Station, the Human Genome Project, and the Large Hadron Collider. However, the major motivation for collaboration in those cases was cost sharing. Achieving similar collaboration on a project that has enormous security implications would be more difficult. A country that believed it could achieve a breakthrough unilaterally might be tempted to go it alone rather than subordinate its efforts to a joint project. A country might also refrain from joining an international collaboration from fear that other participants might siphon off collaboratively generated insights and use them to accelerate a covert national project. An international project would thus need to overcome major security challenges, and a fair amount of trust would probably be needed to get it started, trust that may take time to develop. Very important part, because consider that even after the thaw in relationship between United States and the Soviet Union following Gorbachev's ascent to power, arms reduction efforts, which could be greatly in the interest of both superpowers, had a fitful beginning. And Gorbachev was seeking steep reductions in nuclear arms, but negotiations stalled on the issue of Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, which was called Star Wars, and which the Kremlin strenuously opposed. And at the Reykjavik summit meeting in 1986, Reagan proposed that the United States would share with the Soviet Union the technology that would be developed under the Strategic Defense Initiative, so that both countries could enjoy protection against accidental launches and against smaller nations that might develop nuclear weapons. Yet Gorbachev was not persuaded by this apparent win-win position, because it was really a win-win position. He viewed the gambit as a ruse, refusing to credit the nation that the Americans would share the fruits of their most advanced military research at a time when they were not even willing to share with the Soviets their technology for milking cows. And regardless of whether Reagan was in fact sincere in his offer or not about this superpower collaboration, mistrust made the proposal a non-starter. Which is why, as I said, even in technological projects, trust is the number one thing. But collaboration is easier to achieve between allies, but even there, it is not automatic. When the Soviet Union and the United States were allied against Germany during World War II, the United States concealed its atomic bomb project from the Soviet Union. The United States did collaborate on the Manhattan Project with Britain and Canada. Similarly, the United Kingdom concealed its success in breaking the German Enigma code from the Soviet Union, but shared it, albeit with some difficulty, with the United States. And this suggests that in order to achieve international collaboration on some technology that is of pivotal importance for national security, it might be necessary to have built beforehand a close and trusting relationship, and history showed us that it is almost impossible. But the time is changing, and we will see what other relationships we can form. And we will return this in my next videos to the desirability and feasibility of international collaboration in the development of intelligence amplification technologies. Will the project choose to create a Singleton with a significant strategic advantage? Think about a historically similar situation. In 1945, the US began developing nuclear weapons. Up until the Soviet Union discovered the atom bomb in 1949, it was the only nuclear power. And the United States may have had or been in a position to achieve a definite military advantage during this time and for a while after. Then, theoretically, the United States could have produced a Singleton using its nuclear monopoly. It could have achieved this by, for example, launching an all-out effort to increase its nuclear arsenal and then threatening a nuclear first strike to obliterate the industrial capacity of any impending nuclear program in the USSR and any other nation tempted to develop a nuclear capability. And the use of its nuclear arsenal as bargaining chip to negotiate a strong international government, a veto-less United Nations with a nuclear monopoly, and a mandate to take all necessary measures to prevent any country from developing its own nuclear weapons would have been a more benign strategy that might also have had a chance of succeeding. And these two ideas were put forth at the time. Some well-known intellectuals, including Bertrand Russell and John von Neumann, supported the hardline strategy of launching or threatening a first strike. The fact that threatening a nuclear first strike today seems almost absurd or immoral may be a sign of civilizational advancement. A version of the benign approach was tried in 1946 by the United States in the form of the Baruch Plan. The proposal involved the United States giving up its temporary nuclear monopoly. Uranium and thorium mining and nuclear technology will be placed under the control of an international agency operating under the auspices of the United Nations. And the proposal called for the permanent members of the Security Council to give up their vetoes in matters related to nuclear weapons in order to prevent any great power found to be in breach of the accord from the vetoing the imposition of remedies. And Stalin, seeing that the Soviet Union and its allies could be easily outvoted in both the Security Council and the General Assembly, rejected the proposal. A first atmosphere of mutual suspicion descended on the relations between the former wartime allies, mistrust that soon solidified into the Cold War. And as had been widely predicted, a costly and extremely dangerous nuclear arms race followed, and this was the beginning of Cold War. Many factors might dissuade a human organization with a decisive strategic advantage from creating a singleton. These include non-aggregative or bounded utility functions, non-maximizing decision rulers, confusion and uncertainty, coordination problems, and maybe various costs associated with the takeover. But what if it were not a human organization, but a superintelligent artificial agent that came into possession of a decisive strategic advantage? Would aforementioned factors be equally effective at inhibiting an AI from attempting to seize power? Let me briefly run through the list of factors and consider how they might apply in this case. Well then, human individuals and human organizations typically have preferences over resources that are not well represented by an unbounded aggregative utility function. A human will typically not wager all her capital for a 50-50 chance of doubling it. A state will typically not risking losing all this territory for a 10% chance of a tenfold expansion. And for individuals, or governments, there are diminishing returns to most resources. And the same need not hold for AIs. An AI might therefore be more likely to pursue a risky course of an action that has some chances of giving it control of the world. Humans and human-run organizations may also operate with decision processes that do not seek to maximize expected utility. For example, they may allow for fundamental risk aversion or satisficing decision rules that focus on meeting adequacy thresholds, or the ontological side constraints that prescribe certain kinds of action regardless of how desirable their consequences. Human decision makers often seem to be acting out an identity for a social role rather than seeking to maximize the achievement of some particular objective. And again, these need not apply to artificial agents. Bounded utility functions, risk aversions, and non-maximizing decision rules may combine synergistically with strategic confusion and uncertainty. Revolutions, even when they succeed in overthrowing the existing order, often fail to produce the outcome that their instigators had promised. This tends to say that the hand of a human agent, if the contemplated action is irreversible, non-breaking and lacking precedent. Superintelligence might receive the situation more clearly and therefore face less strategic confusion and uncertainty about the outcome should it attempt to use its strategic advantage to consolidate its dominant position. And another major factor that can inhibit groups from exploiting a potentially decisive strategic advantage is the problem of internal coordination. Members of conspiracy that is in a position to seize power must worry not only about being infiltrated from the outside, but also about being overthrown by some smaller coalition of insiders. If a group consists of, say, 100 people, and a majority of 60 can take power and disenfranchise the non-conspirators, what is then to stop a certified strong subset of these 60 from disenfranchising the other 25, and then maybe a subset of 20 disenfranchising the other 15? Each of the original 100 might have good reason to uphold certain established norms to prevent the general unraveling that could result from any attempt to change the social contracts by means of a naked power grab. And this problem of internal coordination would not apply to AI system that constitutes a single unified agent. And finally, there is the issue of cost. Even if the United States or any other developed countries could have used its nuclear monopoly to establish a singleton, it might not have been able to do so without incurring substantial costs. In the case of a negotiated agreement to place nuclear weapons under the control of a reformed and strengthened United Nations, these costs might have been relatively small, but the cost, moral, economic, political, and human, of actually attempting world conquest through the waging of nuclear war would have been almost unspeakably large, even during the period of nuclear monopoly. And with sufficient technological superiority, however, this cost will be far smaller. Consider, for example, a scenario in which one nation has such a vast technological lead that it could safely disarm all other nations at the press of button, without anybody dying or being injured, and with almost no damage to infrastructure or to the cities or to the general environment. With such almost magical technological superiority, a first strike will be a lot more tempting. Or consider an even greater level of technological superiority, which might enable to frontrunner to cause other nations to voluntarily lay down their arms, not by threatening them with destruction, but simply by persuading a great majority of their populations by means of an extremely effectively designed advertising and propaganda campaign extolling the virtues of global unity. And if this were done with the intention to benefit everybody, I mean everybody, for example, by replacing national rivalries and arms race with a fair, representative, and effective world government, it is not clear that there would be even a cogent moral objection to the leveraging of a temporary strategic advantage into a permanent singleton. Various considerations thus point to an increased likelihood that a future power with superintelligence that obtained a sufficiently large strategic advantage would actually use it to form a singleton. The desirability of such an outcome depends, of course, on the nature of the singleton that will be created, and also on what the future of intelligent life would look like in alternative multipolar scenarios. We will revisit these questions in my later videos. But first, let me take a closer look at why and how superintelligence will be powerful and effective at achieving outcomes in the world. See you.